There are very few teams in the NHL that can withstand injuries to their injury recalls on the blue line. The Bruins failed to contain the Detroit Red Wings last night, and with David Pastrnak also out, it could be a real tough run up to the Christmas break.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm Ian McLaren, and we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. On today's episode, we are going to break down last night's loss to the Detroit Red Wings, one that appeared closer than it really was. The Bruins were already depleted on the blue line. They had an injury to Michael Callahan. Jeremy Swayman was pulled because he wasn't getting a ton of support in front of him, and the Bruins were looking for a spark. They got it. They pulled it to within one goal with about 10 seconds left, but ultimately it wasn't enough. And with another recall on the way, Charlie McAvoy already out, David Pastrnak also out and likely not to play this week at the very least. The Bruins could be in tough to pick up some points here as we get closer to the holiday break. We'll break down the storylines, the stats, and the signals from last night's game. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Before we get into it, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on socials at Locked NHL Bruins. That's on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, TikTok. You can find the podcast as well on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube if you have not subscribed already. I am your host, Ian McLaren, a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team and the NHL for various outlets for 20 years. The Bruins last night got into an early hole, and it was, in the end, a 5-4 loss to the Detroit Red Wings, a team that they had just beaten on Saturday in a shootout. It was the second game of a home-and-home, and the Bruins were already playing without Charlie McAvoy. They were playing without David Pastrnak, and despite getting Victor Arvidsson back from injury, it just wasn't enough. And to compound things, it was an injury to Michael Callahan, who did not play after the first period with a lower body injury. That brought the Bruins down to 5 defensemen for 2 periods. When you're already leaning on your injury call-ups and they are injured, it's going to be really tough to lock things down. Sturm said he didn't think Callahan will be ready for the next few days. The team should know more about his status on today in advance of tomorrow night's game against the St. Louis Blues, and that could launch another recall with the Bruins already severely depleted on the blue line. Again, they're without Charlie McAvoy, their anchor on defense after he took that puck to the face a few weeks ago, had to undergo surgery. They are without Jordan Harris, who's on long-term injured reserve. They are without Henry Jokiharju, who is out with an injury. Right now, they have Hampus Lindholm on the top pair with Andrew Peeke, Nikita Zadorov playing with Jonathan Aspiro, who had his first goal in the NHL last night. Congratulations to him. And then Callahan was playing with Mason Lohrei. So that is, 2 guys at least who likely should be in the AHL, although Aspiro has played pretty well, but your 8th defenseman at best, your 9th defenseman in Michael Callahan, with the 7th defenseman, Jordan Harris, already injured. And now you're likely going to get another guy called up, the 10th defenseman, to suit up for the Boston Bruins this season. Ideally, your top 2 guys are Lindholm and McAvoy, and then you have Zadorov with Peeke or Jokiharju and Lohrei playing with one of those guys as well. That's your top 6. Callahan was in. Aspiro's still in. Harris is out. McAvoy's out. Like, it's really difficult to get 2 points in the NHL against a team. Not that Detroit is a juggernaut, but they do have the offensive weapons to make you pay. And look, the guys battled. They brought it to within 5-4 late in the game. Sturm afterwards said, for some reason, we just can't stay healthy. And they also have to play smarter 5-on-5 to get some points. And while the decision was made to pull Jeremy Swayman, it wasn't necessarily because of his poor performance. They have slim margin for error with McAvoy out, all these other injuries on the blue line, and it's just putting strain on everybody. Sturm said it was almost not fair to Swayman, the way they played in front of him. They kind of left him alone a little bit. He could have had saved maybe 1 or 2 more, but he's been so good. He just wanted to change it up a little bit to maybe give the Bruins a bit more of a spark. In came Eunice Korpisalo, who hasn't been great lately, but he did his part to keep the Bruins in the game, making 9 saves on 9 shots. The Bruins were able to make it 5-4. Marat Husnudinov scored his 4th goal of the season at about 14:57 of the third. Alex Steeves scored with 12 seconds remaining, his 2nd goal of the game. But it was not enough, and the damage had already been done as the Bruins were down 3-0 before Aspiro scored his 1st goal. Steeves scored his 4th goal of the season to make it 3-2 at that point. But then Ben Sherratt, Lucas Raymond put it ultimately out of reach. You'll note the goal scorers for the Bruins last night: Aspiro, Steeves, and Husnudinov. Morgan Geekie did get a couple assists in this one. But again, we talk about the injuries on the blue line. We can't not mention the fact that it was the 3rd straight game that Boston's top player, David Pastrnak, has missed time with a lower body injury. Based on Marco Sturm's pregame comments and some reports out there, notably from Kevin Paul Dupont of the Boston Globe, it doesn't appear as though he will be returning Thursday night against the Blues, or perhaps even Saturday against the Devils. Next week, they only have 2 games. So it's possible they just shut him down for a couple of weeks in order to make sure he comes back at full strength. Sturm said they've got to be careful with him. He's not skating right now. Doesn't expect him to play this week. Definitely needs a few practices or a few skates in order to come back into the lineup. So a prolonged absence would be really detrimental to a team that's relying on him to succeed. Even with the 4 goals scored last night, even with Morgan Geekie playing at the highest of levels, the Bruins need David Pastrnak in order to compete, in order to succeed. On top of that, you have McAvoy out. On top of that, you have Yoki Haru and Harris out, who are expected to be in the mix for the top 6, top 7. That's 3 of your top 7 defensemen out of the lineup. No matter how well Jeremy Swayman is playing, if you have 2-3 guys that are meant to be in the AHL level defensemen, then you're going to struggle, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now for the Boston Bruins. It's not an excuse. Next man up, play hard, etc., etc. The Bruins have that mentality, but it is an explanation. You take any team and put 2-3 guys who started in the AHL in the lineup against, yes, a team that can score like the Detroit Red Wings or any team in the NHL for that matter, and you're going to feel that strain. You add to that continuing to have a pretty steady stream of penalties. The Bruins took 28 penalty minutes last night to extend their league lead in that not very positive category. And again, it's going to fall apart. That's what happened. We'll take a look more at some stats from last night's game, where the Bruins stand, and also the significance of the loss here as the podcast continues. It's becoming more apparent that hydration is everything. When I'm hydrated, everything just works better. Focus, energy, mood, even my skin. That's why I've been using Drip Drop. It's doctor developed hydration that keeps me feeling running at full power no matter what my day looks like. Drip Drop is not your average sports drink. It delivers 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands using a science-backed formula trusted by medical professionals, even firefighters, and over 90% of top college and pro teams. Again, hydration is a non-negotiable, and Drip Drop helps me feel sharper, calmer, and honestly just better overall. Right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 20% off. Stock up now before the holidays hit and keep your body and mind performing at their best with Drip Drop. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. I appreciate you everydayers so much. You subscribe on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, and you've made Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So very much appreciated. Let's take a look at some stats from last night's game as well as the significance of the loss. The Bruins did have the advantage in shots on goal last night, something that's been a bit of a rarity this season. 38 shots on goal compared to 32 for the Detroit Red Wings. Unfortunately, Jeremy Swayman was a bit leaky early on. He allowed 5 goals on 23 shots for a .783 save percentage, dropping his season mark, which had gone to as high as .915, back down to .910. So that really took a hit last night for Jeremy Swayman. Again, not all on him, and maybe it was to keep him fresh so that he can get back in there on Thursday against the Blues, or maybe they'll decide to go with Korpisalo, who, as hard as I've been on him this season, was solid in his 12 minutes and 36 seconds of play, making 9 saves on 9 shots. Now, a big problem for this team last night and all season long has been penalty minutes. The Bruins lead the league in this stat, and they accrued 28 minutes in penalties last night. Now, a couple of those were on some bigger misconducts. The Red Wings did score 1 power play goal in the third period, and that was after, I believe, Hampus Lindholm took a holding penalty on former Bruin James Van Riemsdyk, who scored last night. But then you had Nikita Zadorov getting 4 minutes for roughing Mo Seider and then a 10-minute misconduct. Later on, you had Mark Kastelik getting 2 minutes for slashing Marco Kasper and then 10-minute misconduct as well. So those 2 infractions, that's 26 minutes and penalties right there, put the Bruins well above. The Bruins have to stay disciplined. You cannot keep straining your penalty killers and can't keep taking so many penalties and expect to remain competitive night in and night out. You have to remain more disciplined. It's just a non-negotiable, and it's something that has carried over from last season where they also led the league in penalty minutes. Their penalty kill has been exceptional so far, going 1 for 3 last night. One of the better units in the NHL so far this season, but the penalties just cannot continue to stand. Now, another notable stats from last night, you had Morgan Geekie leading the way with 5 shots on goal. He also had a couple of assists to raise his total to 8 so far this season. He did not find the back of the net. And Nathan MacKinnon scored a couple goals last night to pass him in the goals race. He still has 20 goals, 8 assists now, 28 points in 28 games for a point per game average. On the blue line, you had Andrew Peeke and Jonathan Aspiro leading the way with 4 blocks. Unfortunately for Andrew Peeke, he was on the ice for 4 of the 5 goals against, or maybe even the 5th, but he was a -4, meaning he was on the ice for all 4 of Detroit's even strength goals last night, which just is not going to cut it, especially for a guy who is being called upon to carry heavy minutes. He was the second highest defenseman in terms of ice time last night. Hampus Lindholm around 25 minutes. Andrew Peeke at 23 minutes and 10 seconds. Followed by Mason Lohrei, who has at almost 22 minutes last night. Had a block. Notably for him, again, last year he was a -43. Worst in the NHL. So far this season, he's +1 and has played pretty well since the recent string of scratches. He did have a pretty bad giveaway the other night that Jeremy Swayman bailed him out from. And the offense isn't really coming. He's only got 10 points in 23 games this season. I think like none over his past 8 games. But at the same time, he hasn't been a negative out there as much as he was last season, just by way of looking at the plus minus. Now for the Bruins as a team, again, the penalty kill has been exceptional this season. They're 8th ranked, 82.6. The power play didn't click last night, but they're still 6th at 24.7%. Overall, last night, maybe the Bruins deserved a bit of a better fate based on the way that they were playing at 5-on-5. The shot attempts were even, but they were not able to generate the number of scoring chances and especially the number of high danger chances that Detroit was able to. The Red Wings were just carving up the Bruins in the offensive zone, recording 31 scoring chances at 5-on-5 compared to 20 for the Bruins. And high danger chances were 13-6 in favor of the Red Wings. That's about 68% advantage for Detroit at 5-on-5. 14-8 in all situations. Expected goals were about 4-3 last night. Final score was 5-4. So basically things ended up working out pretty much as the game went along. Shots, the Bruins had more attempts, they had more shots, but the Red Wings had more scoring chances and high danger chances, and that is what kind of sunk the Bruins last night. And again, it all comes back to health on the blue line. This is not an excuse. You can't just say, well, the Bruins, they have a depleted blue line, so obviously they're going to lose. It's not an excuse. That's just an explanation. Again, you look at any team around the NHL, you take your top defenseman out of the mix, you take a couple guys, bottom pairing guys like Yoki Haru, Jordan Harris. You have to call up a Michael Callahan. He goes out. You're playing with only 5 defensemen, 4 later on in the game with Zadorov being sent off because of that misconduct. You're going to struggle. And Andrew Peeke, no disrespect, should not be averaging 23 minutes of ice time per game. In an ideal world, you have Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy as your top 2 defensemen, Zadorov with a Peeke or Yoki Haru, and then Lohrei with either Peeke or Yoki Haru rocking on the third pairing. Yoki Haru's out, McAvoy's out, Jordan Harris, your 7th defenseman, is out. You've got Jonathan Aspiro out there trying to keep the Bruins in the game, being asked to do it a lot. as a first-year NHL player. Now you're going to have to call up another guy to replace Michael Callahan, whether that's Frederick Brunet or Victor Soderstrom. We'll have to see how that shakes out. But the Bruins, very depleted on the blue line, and that is going to tilt the ice in the opposition's favor, as we saw last night, with the scoring chances and high danger chances being heavily in Detroit's favor. What's the significance of last night's loss? Where do the Bruins now stand in the Eastern Conference playoff picture? We'll take a look at that here as the podcast continues. NFL Sundays move so fast, and one big play, suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum, swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props that update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. Keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com. Place your NFL live bets with FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. All right, with last night's loss, the Detroit Red Wings drew level with our Bruins in terms of total points, bumping them out of a top 3 spot in the Atlantic and out of the playoff picture altogether. The Red Wings are now 14, 11, and 2, 30 total points. The Bruins have 30 points. They're 15 and 13, but they've played 28 games. And in terms of point percentage, the Bruins are now 5th in the Atlantic, ahead of the Maple Leafs, who've won a couple games in a row, and the Buffalo Sabres and Florida Panthers, who are both at 500 and in the basement of the Atlantic. You have to think the Panthers are going to rebound at some point. Despite Brad Marchand's strong start to the season, they are, of course, without Matthew Tkachuk and Alexander Barkov. They've lost 3 in a row. The Sabres and Leafs have won 2 straight each. Toronto is 3 points back of the Bruins with 2 games in hand. Sabres are 4 points back with 2 games in hand. So both of them could, in theory, catch the Bruins with those hypothetical points on the table. And that's all they are at the moment, is hypothetical points. The Tampa Bay Lightning lost last night 1-0, but they still have the best goal differential by far in the Atlantic, and it's not even close. They're the only team with a positive at plus 18. The Bruins now 3rd or 4th, I should say, at -4. But big picture in the Eastern Conference, the Bruins, they have 30 points, which is tied with the New York Rangers, the Red Wings, the Senators for the, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4th highest point total in the East, because you have Carolina, Tampa, Washington tied in first at 34, the Devils at 33, then Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, the Islanders at 31 points, and then the Bruins level with 3 other teams at 30 points. But because they've played so many games, if you put it at point percentage, the Bruins are 13th right now, or tied for 12th, I guess, with the New York Rangers at 536. So last night's loss was kind of devastating to their playoff hopes. Maybe devastating is a strong word, but the Bruins are 4-6 over their past 10 games. And again, with David Pastrnak out, with Charlie McAvoy out, now with the blue line being even more depleted, it's going to be a pretty tough road ahead for this team as they look to stay afloat. If you are without Pastrnak for a prolonged period of time, Charlie McAvoy likely not back until the new year. It's going to be a strain on Marco Sturm and the roster. They're scrapping, they're fighting, they're playing with a lot of that piss and vinegar that Don Sweeney and Cam Neely were talking about prior to the season. Maybe a bit too much in terms of the penalty minutes that they're accruing. But until those big guys come back and are able to play regularly, it's going to be a tough road ahead for the Bruins, and it could then put them in sell mode as opposed to looking to add. We talked earlier this week about the Vancouver Canucks, Kiefer Sherwood being on the table. Maybe a guy like Connor Garland is more attractive because of the fact that he is basically adding a UFA who is locked in. He has a $6 million per season contract that begins next season. So you're kind of getting ahead of the free agent market by grabbing a guy who's under contract for the foreseeable future. Maybe they look at that. Victor Arvidsson was able to return last night, but he looked a bit rusty and out of place. It'll take some time for him to refine that chemistry with Casey Middlestat and Pavel Zacha. But the big picture is Callahan, who was already an emergency call-up after Yoki Haru landed on injured reserve. Already following the McAvoy injury. Jordan Harris on long-term injured reserve with ankle injury. So it's, again, next man up for the Bruins. Could be Frederic Brunet. It could be Victor Soderstrom if they want to go with a right-hand shot. Billy Sweezy, perhaps. But we're really kind of not going bottom of the barrel here, but it's a tough sell to win night in and night out with such heavy reinforcements on the blue line. The Bruins will be in action next tomorrow night against Jim Montgomery's St. Louis Blues. That's a team that's also struggling. We'll preview that game in full. Some drama the other night with this team as Jordan Binnington was pulled and gave Montgomery an earful about that. The Bruins likely will face Joel Hofer, who has been pretty good lately for the Blues. Anyways, we'll preview that game in full tomorrow and bring you all the latest on the Boston Bruins, because that's what we do here on the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. Thank you so much for making it your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL Game Night podcast. Every game, every night until the Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Local analysis on a national scale. You can find it on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Please do subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins if you have not done so already. Please take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. And we'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.